We've already done a video about cards that people forgot were banned, as well as a video about cards that people forgot were unlimited. In today's video, we are completing the series by talking about Yu-Gi-Oh cards that a lot of people forget are limited. We're not going to do a semi-limited video because it's only 3 cards currently semi-limited on the ban list, but there are a lot of limited cards that I think people have completely forgotten are on there. The cards in today's video are going to fall under 3 basic categories. The first category is cards that maybe have been limited for a very long time, so many players that are playing nowadays maybe don't even remember when they first got limited. They might have not even been playing back in the day. The second category is basically going to be cards that have been banned for a while and then just recently, in like the last couple of years, went to limited, and these are cards that maybe haven't seen a lot of play since they've been limited. Maybe they had a lot of hype when they first went from banned to that point, but at least in today's format and since they've been limited, they haven't seen that much play, so you might have still thought that they were actually banned. The third and final category of cards in today's video is going to be limited cards that are featured in degenerate combos when they're not limited. There are plenty of cards that if they're allowed at 3 copies per deck and sometimes even 2 copies per deck, they can cause some pretty degenerate combos. Now sometimes these combos actually aren't making that big of an impact on the meta game where these cards actually got limited. However, Konami saw them to be degenerate and they didn't really care if they were seeing a lot of play. They just didn't want them to have the potential to ruin any tournaments. Can you believe that Knight Assailant has been limited for 15 years? This card was originally limited back in 2005, and that's where it's stayed ever since. What's the deal with this card? Why is it limited, and why do so many people not even know that this card exists in the first place? Knight Assailant is a level 3 Dark Fiend monster that simply says, flip effect, target one monster your opponent controls, destroy that target. Now that's not very good, right? Who really cares about that? Well, it matters for the second half of its effect. When this card is sent from the hand to the graveyard, target one flip effect monster in your graveyard except this card, return that target to the hand. So while the Man-Eater bug side of Knight Assailant doesn't really matter, what does matter is that it is a flip effect monster which you can add back with another copy of Knight Assailant. Sure, it can't add itself back, which is I guess a little bit of foresight on Konami's part. However, if you have one Knight Assailant in hand and one in graveyard, every single time you discard the Knight Assailant in hand, you can add the other one right back to your hand, and you have this infinite loop. We certainly have seen other sort of similar interactions here. I think of Phoenix Blade for warrior decks. While it's not truly infinite like having 2 Knight Assailants would be, it still is nearly infinite for many of the combo decks that were able to use it in combination with Nightmares and other discards. Generally speaking though, I guess Konami is just afraid of having infinite advantage. I'm not so sure if it actually would see play, at least right now or for the last couple years. I can't really think of a deck that actually would have tried to use 2 different copies of Knight Assailant just to loop them, but I guess Konami is afraid of it happening, so for now it's still limited. We also have Chain Strike, and now this is a card that has bounced around on the ban list for many different eras. We have this card limited for a while and then semi-limited for a very long time, but currently it is limited and I can't really figure out why. You see, when I first remembered that Chain Strike was limited instead of semi-limited, I thought, oh, maybe Konami hit it when Balance of Judgment and Secret Blast first came out. These are 2 cards that directly support the Chain Burn archetype. However, they were released in 2015 and Chain Strike was limited in 2018, so 3 years later. So obviously Konami wasn't afraid of these cards too much, and maybe the upcoming release of Mystic Mine, which would have been about a year out after that initial Chain Strike limiting, but even then, I mean, the best Mystic Mine decks certainly do not play Chain Strike or any of the Chain Burn cards. They usually use the more impactful single cards like Wave Motion Cannon. So I really just don't understand why Chain Strike is currently limited. Now, of course, Chain Burn actually has seen a lot of competitive success as a pretty out there rogue strategy in certain formats, but I don't think it's actually that big of a deal. I mean, Chain Burn has never been like a meta deck. It's always just a rogue deck that catches people off guard, and I think that's perfectly fine. So a little while ago, Morphing Jar 2 went to unlimited, and actually this is a card that many players don't really play even at 3 copies per deck, and I feel like a lot of people just assume that because Morphing Jar number 2 is unlimited, so is the original Morphing Jar, but that's actually not the case. You see, Morphing Jar went from banned to limited, and basically no one has taken advantage of it. There were certainly a lot of deck profiles out there. I think even I posted one using Morphing Jar when it first went to limited. I believe I used it in a Dark World Danger deck alongside Card Destruction, but realistically realistically, this card is really weak in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Not only is a flip effect a very slow ability, I mean we all know that, but also giving your opponent a new hand is just not good. Not to mention you'll also be loading up their graveyard with many cards that were already in their hand that might have had graveyard effects. So Morphing Jar is not really played, and I don't think it's not played because it's limited. I think it's just not played because it's not a very good card in 2020. However, the card has still remained limited, and we still have things like Fiber Jar and Cyber Jar still banned, and maybe that's another discussion for another time, whether or not those cards need to be on the ban list. But at least for right now, what matters is that Morphing Jar is limited, it's not seeing play, and it doesn't really see a lot of discussion around it either. Remember when Stein first got limited and all those people posted degenerate FTK combos that you could perform with Stein, and people were like, this even at one copy is gonna ruin the entire game? Well, those combos didn't make a huge tournament impact, and there's actually a problem with a lot of FTKs like that Stein FTK, where while they are very consistent going first, and maybe even against like one hand trap, usually not two hand traps, the main issue is that many FTK strategies simply do not have anything going for them when they actually don't get to go first. This is a huge problem, and it's definitely one of the things that has held back a lot of FTKs, like many of the early Norden FTKs that we were afraid of, or perhaps the early Stein FTKs that people were afraid of when this card went too limited, because there certainly are a lot of crazy things in theory that you can do with Stein. Even besides the crazy convoluted FTK combos, you can do some pretty insane stuff. Against some matchups, just summoning Last Warrior from Another Planet or Naturia Exterio is enough to win the entire game. But even though these Stein FTK strategies didn't make a huge impact, I mean, why aren't people just playing it as a good normal summon? Well, there are certainly more hand traps in the format than when Stein was actually legal. We now have Effect Failure, and we now have Infinite Impermanence that can instantly stop its effect, but more importantly, I think that people just have better things to do than play an inconsistent one-of that you might sometimes draw. Sure, you can switch it with Gear Gigant X, and that's pretty fine, and we see that combo used in a lot of different Stein FTK decks, and certainly there are a bunch of insanely powerful fusion monsters that you can summon with Stein. This card obviously has a lot of potential, it's been really good in the past, and could see play in the future, but for right now, at limited, a lot of people just are not considering Stein when they're building their decks. There are currently 2 Gishki ritual monsters that are limited, and a lot of people don't even know what deck they were played in. I mean, obviously some sort of Gishki deck, but this deck was not very popular, and these cards were not limited at the same time, by the way. You had Goose Kraken limited like 2 formats before the other one. Basically, Goose Kraken would hand loop your opponent because the other one can shuffle back any 5 cards in the graveyards, so you would have infinite resources, especially when you could shuffle back extra copies of itself when it wasn't limited. Still, these cards were not very popular. This combo was not very popular, but it was unfun to play against, extremely unfun to play against, and it was way ahead of its time. We didn't have a lot of the hand traps that we have right now, so stopping this combo would be near impossible a lot of the time. Plenty of other cards have been hit on the ban list because of hand looping combos. The Wind Up hand loop was obviously really degenerate, the Topologic Gumblar Dragon hand loop was really degenerate, but these ones, I mean, while they certainly were annoying to play against, they never reached the height of those other 2 combos and plenty of other ones that have been in the game. However, because both of these cards are pretty much only used for some dumb hand looping combo, I think the vast majority of players are perfectly fine with these cards being limited. We also have Gen X Birdman and Divine Wind of the Mist Valley. So here's the deal. Divine Wind of the Mist Valley has been featured in a lot of different degenerate combos and crazy FTKs, and you almost always played Gen X Birdman in those decks. That wasn't the only way to trigger the combos, but it was one of the best ways and the easiest ways for those types of strategies. However, Gen X Birdman, even though it is limited, and even though it is limited probably because of those degenerate combos, this is a card that actually saw a ton of play just as a good tuner monster for a very long time. I think it is still limited because of the potential for different FTKs and degenerate combos, but it's a real shame because this card was such a popular tuner in Yu-Gi-Oh's history. I mean, a lot of different decks played Gen X Birdman, not for some crazy combo, not for some FTK, but just because it's a good tuner monster. And finally, the last card in today's video is Symbol of Heritage, a card that was preemptively hit before Elder Entity Norden was released in the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG because this thing was doing some pretty degenerate things in the OCG with Norden, and they wanted to hit it before Norden made its way into our format. Limiting Symbol of Heritage did two things. First off, by only having one copy, it's a lot harder to use it multiple times on the same Elder Entity Norden, which is how many of those combos worked. You would have 3 Symbol of Heritage, you would keep reviving the Nordens, it just got more and more insane. But also, the really important thing here is that by only having one copy of this card, you can't guarantee it with Power Tool Dragon, which has to reveal 3 equip spells, which means that you don't always get the Symbol of Heritage if it's only at 1. Still, because this card was limited before it ever made a huge meta impact on the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG, I think there's a lot of people out there that probably don't even know that it currently is on the Forbidden Unlimited list. Anyway though, I hope you guys enjoyed today's discussion video about Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards that you forgot were unlimited. Like I said, now that we've talked about banned cards and unlimited cards and limited cards, that pretty much completes everything that I have to talk about in relation to this series. There's no reason to do a video on these semi-limited cards that you forgot about because there's only a few of them and you probably know what they are. Anyway, I'll see you guys later. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Goodbye.